Rosie, thank you so much for joining us on the Hurt to Lean podcast. I'm incredibly excited for the conversation we're about to have.
Thank you for having me.
Your new book, Completely Normal and Totally Fine, is such an incredibly powerful, honest account of your journey. What made you decide to write it now, and what do you hope readers will take away from it?
I think I decided to write it because after my diagnosis, writing's always been a way which I can be really honest with how I'm feeling. So I've been diarying since I was 12 years old. And with people, whenever they'd ask me how I was, I'd always sort of adapt to not want to bring the mood down. So I'd always give off this impression that everything's fine. Whereas with writing, for some reason, I was able to be completely honest with my thoughts and feelings. And I think when I was looking at books in the space of bipolar, everything was quite overwhelming and intense. And there was nothing I could really relate to, which was like a candid tone and not sugarcoating how it is to manage, but also not being too downbeat. So it was just sort of a medium I wanted to use to talk about my diagnosis and something I really enjoy doing. So it's sort of combining the two.
And what do you hope that readers will sort of finish the book thinking and feeling?
I think it's a mixture of the people who have read it in my life have laughed and cried, which is quite good. So I would like the reader to feel afterwards uplifted, but also educated on quite an important topic. Just because the author's books I enjoy reading always have that for me. I always come away feeling uplifted just because of the tone they use. So I think that's what it would be.
Let's delve into what the book is really centered around. And back in 2018, your life changed dramatically after a psychotic episode at Stansted Airport. Would you be open to sharing what happened and what you now understand about the experience?
Yes. So in 2018, I was 21 years old, and I had been always someone who had struggled with their mental health. So from the age of about 14, I was having really bad depression, and I was just the one at school who would sort of keep it hidden. But I think my friends knew, just because my energy levels were always down and I'd always be sleeping and I'd avoid social situations. But then I think when I left school at 18, because I went straight into a career in modelling, I wasn't around people so much. And in those sort of late teen years, I started having huge energy shifts and elation. And I just knew something wasn't right, but I just thought it was sort of the highs and lows of the modelling industry. I didn't really realise that not sleeping for 24 hours out of excitement and then having 2 days depression wasn't something other young people were experiencing. So 2018, just to put it into context, that was the first year where my mental health started getting in the way of work. I was always sort of doing 5-day weeks with regular clients in London, and I started having panic attacks, which meant that I couldn't get on the tube. I didn't want to see anyone except my mum and my boyfriend, and my whole confidence just completely reduced. So it was the first time where I wanted to seek help and see a doctor, because I just said, I don't know what's happened, but this is not normal. So I was put on antidepressants and I started therapy, and I started seeing a GP regularly, but everything was just getting so much worse. Every month I had new symptoms. I was having hot sweats all night. I wasn't sleeping. The panic attacks became so intense that I couldn't get the tube to work anymore. I'd start getting my mum to drive me to work, and then I'd have to leave all the time and call her in crisis or say no to trips abroad. And then I think because my character broke down so much and I didn't have any life in me, my boyfriend and I broke up, because he was sort of like, what's happened to my girlfriend? I don't know this person. And then the days after, instead of being down and upset about the breakup, I was speaking to my friends saying, I feel completely euphoric and I think I'm cured. I was being very grandiose with what I was saying. And I believe that all of my anxiety and depression had just sort of disappeared. But I was going into my first manic episode. And so for 2 weeks, my thoughts started to become very spiritual and religious. And it's sort of escalating to believing that God had sent me and I was about to sort of walk on water, be Jesus. It's actually really weird to have believed that for a good few weeks. But then Stansted was the first day where I went into psychosis from the lack of sleep and those sort of ideas keeping me awake all night. And I was hallucinating from about 4 a.m. I was an angel. I was running in front of cars. I was not knowing what was going on because I didn't know what my eyesight was, and I was hearing voices. And then my parents had wanted me to join them on their holiday in Croatia because a few days earlier I said to them that I think I was a reincarnation of a sibling who died from leukemia. And at that point, my mum still didn't know it was bipolar. She just thought, this is not a normal conversation to be having with me. You need to come out and be with me physically so I can sort of see how you are in real life. And then at Stansted, I think after hours that morning of hallucinating and being so frightened, I just knew that I needed help. And jumping through baggage drop off at Stansted was, I guess, my way of saying, I need attention, I need help. It was like a cry for help, but it was also because I thought I was maybe dreaming. Nothing was normal. And then I was arrested because I'd set off the fire alarm and sent to A&E. And then from A&E, I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and I was in Ealing Hospital for 3 months.
And what was your experience of being in Ealing Hospital like?
To be honest, the first 6 to 8 weeks are like a complete blur, because with psychosis, you're not aware of, you're experiencing time at a different rate. You're hearing voices, you're seeing things. And so I didn't know where I was, who my parents were, anything like that. So I couldn't process the diagnosis or be sad or happy or anything. I was just completely on another planet. And then when I came out of psychosis through medication at hospital, I was monitored, but I still wasn't sleeping at all. So for those 3 months, it was just chemically high, so feeling amazing. But then there was a lot of fear because I didn't know what was going on. In a hospital setting is quite overwhelming. And there was a lot of other people there who were all severely ill. So we were all sort of in our own realities around each other, because everyone was sort of schizophrenic or bipolar or very suicidal. So it was a really frightening experience, and a very sort of hard-hitting introduction to bipolar, I guess.
Gosh, Rosie, I'm so sorry, and thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, yeah, it must be terrifying also when you come out of psychosis to sort of realize where you are and what's happened, because is your recollection very clear, or are there moments where you're just, you don't have a memory of what happened?
The first 8 weeks, I don't really remember anything. I remember the visuals of some things, but my mum walked into the sitting room, which was like this shared area we all had to be in the day. And I remember saying to her and bursting into tears and saying, oh my goodness, that's my mum. I was like, where am I? Where are we? What's going on? I was like, why haven't I seen you in so long? And she was like, I've been here every day. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, what? She was like, I've been here every day. We're 7 weeks in. And I had no recollection of her ever coming before or where I was. So yeah, it was a very weird experience.
And forgive my naivety, but how do they bring you out of psychotic episode? Is it all drugs, or is there any sort of talking therapy that goes on alongside that?
You're not really. The thing is with bipolar 1 is you need to sort of treat the issue before anything like talking therapy or any other thing like that can help, because until you're understanding English again, you're just in a sort of state where you can't relate to anyone. So you start with antipsychotics, but obviously the first few days you're there, it's not like now if you went to a doctor where you drink some water and take some pills, you're not open to anything. You're sort of thinking everyone's attacking you. You're really paranoid, so they have to inject it into you. And I remember moments of that, of being pinned down and having these things injected into my legs, but I didn't actually register that I was taking medication, that I was in hospital, or that I was having a diagnosis until sort of the last third, I think.
Will you talk us through the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2?
So from what I understand, and this is only because I've got a lot of friends who have bipolar 2. Some people say that bipolar 2 is more of a depressive thing than bipolar 1, but I guess the main difference is that with bipolar 1 you go into psychosis, so it's a state you can't not be in a hospital for, because you're a threat to yourself if you're walking the streets and you think you can fly, whereas bipolar 2, you both have hypomania and you both have depression, so you have these extreme mood capacities, and that is sort of, to have the diagnosis either 1 or 2, you have to have those two states for prolonged amounts of time. But with bipolar 1 comes this extra layer of delusion, which tends to be very spiritual. And if I didn't take antipsychotics, I would go into that state all the time. So yeah, that's why you tend to get the diagnosis younger, because the first time it happens is so obvious. But it is, yeah, sometimes different medication as well, because it's just a different state, I guess.
And in retrospect, can you identify that you maybe had a psychotic episode earlier on, or do you think that was your first one?
That was the first psychotic episode, because I mean that lasted 3 months, and that was with medication on day one. I think if you weren't given medication, who knows how long that would last, because everyone in this state is treated. But apparently some people are in that state for 6 months. So I was actually the shorter end of how long psychosis can last for someone with type 1 bipolar. Looking back, I had religious delusion probably since the age of 18. I started thinking that something was different about me and believing that I had quite grand powers. But because I was in a job where I was alone so much, I just missed it, and I wrote about it, but I didn't really tell anyone. And I was aware it was weird, because I grew up atheist, and then suddenly I'd have days where I'd believe that I was God. But because I wasn't seeing things or hearing voices, I just thought, that's a weird thought.
And so you didn't dip quite into that sort of psychosis, but yeah, the thoughts were maybe present earlier on.
Yeah, and also for most people with bipolar 1, the first time you do have an episode is your first sort of trauma. So for me, it was a breakup and heartbreak. It was such a strong emotion to deal with, and so it sent me into my first episode. But a lot of people with bipolar 1 getting their diagnosis, it will be around leaving school or having grief for the first time or a breakup. It's something which is a strong emotion for anyone. Yeah, with someone with bipolar 1, it can be the first thing which sends you into psychosis.
And do you live in fear now that you'll dip back into a psychotic episode, or do you think you've been on the drugs and the medication long enough so that you know that actually they are kind of stopping you from dipping into that? Is there any chance that you will have a psychotic episode if you're on the right medication?
Not really, because they're so strong, and it's not something which builds up in your system. You take it every day. So the only risk with going psychotic again, and luckily I've interviewed so many people with bipolar 1 and a few friends of mine who have had more than one episode, they just say it's when you think you can do without the meds. And so because I've so enjoyed having a career again and hanging out with friends again and having all these normal things happen, I just wouldn't put myself at risk. And the medication's main purpose is to make you sleep. So someone with bipolar 1 naturally doesn't really sleep a lot. And the closest I've come to another episode was at the end of last year, sort of September, October, November. I had a high where I was sleeping 3 hours a night for 3 months. And at that point, because I know what I'm dealing with, I saw a doctor and just said, I just need more medication at the moment. It was really high, but I just could not risk full psychosis. So in those moments, I just really try and get stronger medication to sleep again.
Have you had therapy? Does that help at all? Or is it really purely medication that's the crux of it?
I had therapy before I was diagnosed, which I think was incredible. When I was dealing with anxiety and depression and I was seeking help, I did a year every week seeing a psychiatrist. And, you know, I went through my childhood and I dealt with a lot of stuff, which I think is work, which will always benefit me in the long run. But I think since my diagnosis, because I was missed in the system, I felt a bit upset that it was missed in therapy. And then I was just quite unlucky with the therapist I was given through the NHS. When I was on a lot of medication, it sort of triggered this binge eating episode. And I remember her saying to me, this isn't your bipolar, this is because you're in a stupid industry like modeling. And it just put me off so much ever speaking to someone, because I was like, what's the point in speaking about a symptom which has come from too much medication? And then luckily I don't struggle with binging anymore because I'm now on less bipolar medication. But I think I've just had a few cases where I've sort of lost trust in therapy. But it's something which I would so love to revisit and focus on the present with now. Now that I've sort of, found stability, I think it's something you should do before you reach crisis again. I'd love to do it. Just have always dipped into it for short amount of time at the moment, never committed to something weekly again.
Yeah, no, fair enough. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that surround bipolar? I mean, what were the biggest obstacles that you've had to overcome in communicating with your family and your friends about maybe what they thought it was? That was weird. About what they thought it was, or just about how you would present as someone with bipolar?
I think, yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions is that it is this alien diagnosis, which is sort of in the world of schizophrenia, and you're in a psych ward and you're hallucinating. And actually, so many of my symptoms are comorbid with other illnesses, which other friends my age have. So I think that's just the main thing, is that it's this different sort of whole realm which your friends can't relate to, whereas actually a lot of my friends can relate to a lot of what I deal with, which is why I just try to be really open about it, because I know that so many people would benefit so much from the correct diagnosis if they didn't think, oh, because I'm anxious, it can't be bipolar. Whereas actually someone with bipolar will probably have anxiety at some point in their life. And so, yeah, I think the misconception is it's not that common, when actually it's, I think 2 in every 100 people has it.
Wow, it is. I know. And I mean, I think there is this, I mean, it obviously used to be called manic depression. And so there's this slight shame, I feel, attached to being diagnosed with like something that people
massively,
yeah, they don't really know what to expect. It's like, oh God, are you in a manic phase, or are you in a depressed phase, or are you going to suddenly like sort of go weird on me? I mean, how do you find dealing with that? Or do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, when I got my diagnosis for 2 years, I was in complete self-hatred, because the connotations of bipolar are just someone bad or evil or flippant, erratic. It's like all these words I said to myself. I was like, this is you have this, and what a horrible thing to have. And then luckily, because I've worked with a charity like Bipolar UK, and I've met so many people who have it, who are lovely and kind and open, and it's changed my opinion of the illness, and just made me realize that it's not one personality type. It's just a neurodivergence. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. But it was definitely, yeah, I called my maths teacher bipolar because he used to throw rulers at kids. And so I was really shocked when I found out I had it, and really worried about my life. So yeah, had to change my opinion of myself a lot.
Do you think once you've been sectioned again, I mean, how did you deal with that with your friends? Because again, being sectioned, people think, oh my God, someone's been sectioned. You're really serious. And again, what this sort of slight unknown attached to it. How have you dealt with that?
I think it was just one of those things where even when I came out of hospital, I was having 2 or 3 doctor's appointments a week. And I would say, I want to go back to work in January. And all my doctors would say, it's probably closer to 2 years. And I just couldn't relate to my friends. I was so low for 7 months after my episode. And when they were talking about dating and drinking, I just thought that we are just having the most different 20s experience. And I think with being sectioned, I sort of knew that everyone knew, but I was just so embarrassed to have lost my mind. And I think because I hadn't built up my confidence that I wouldn't have loads of episodes, I was just worried that that would be my normal. So I was really embarrassed by it. And luckily 25% of people only have one psychotic episode, but when you're so low and worried about your future, you just focus on the 75%, which sort of have more than one episode. So it was a lot to deal with socially, for sure.
How did you reintegrate yourself with your friends? Because I can imagine it's hard building that trust again with people, and not thinking that, oh God, what are they thinking? And oh God, do they think I'm weird? Or is our friendship the same as it was before my episode? How did you navigate that?
It was really difficult. I lost a lot of friends because people just assumed I didn't want to be invited, because everyone knew I was off work for nearly 2 years after my episode. And a lot of that was depression, because I was dealing socially with being the one who lost their mind. And then also the energy levels of bipolar depression are so depleting, and you actually can't exercise or see friends. So I was withdrawing a lot. And then what comes hand in hand with that is people know that you're not drinking, so they don't invite you, or they'd go on holidays and not even think to ask. And I think it was that more than anything which upset me, because it's still nice to be asked, even if you would say no. But the real friends kept inviting me. and the ones who maybe weren't supposed to be in my life as an adult have just slipped away. And it's really funny because they sort of come back around now. And I'm like, so you want to be my friend 6 years later when I'm functioning again? I'm like, no way.
I know.
I can't be bothered to have you back in my life. Like, this will be the fakest friendship ever. So yeah, my really good friends were just incredible at reading the room as well, and just offering to come and watch TV with me, or like go to the cinema where I don't have to talk and have a personality. They sort of were emotionally intelligent enough to just do things with me, which was zero pressure. And then now that I've gone back to being fun and being out with them again, it's like no time has passed. So really nice.
Yeah, it's so funny. I found that too, as someone who doesn't drink and I don't take drugs, because I just know that they're, for me, it's a control thing. But also when you're mentally unstable, I think, they add to the instability somewhat. And it's in my worst, darkest of periods, it's amazing how some people just immediately disappear, and then when you're on good form again, they sort of reappear. And you have to be quite discerning, and you have more of a radar. And you just are like, no, you're not my tribe, you're not for me.
No. And also you just get to meet so many people by being yourself. You attract people who are open to who you are. And even with the running community, I found in the last year since getting into long distance running, it's just people who I meet where we're not drinking and we're running for 3 hours, and I'm like, wow, I think you think like me. And you just click instantly, and they become such good friends. So definitely been reassured that real friendships don't have to be the longest ones as well.
Yeah, no, completely. Are there any early warning signs with the sort of hypomania and the depressive episodes that you now can recognize and maybe avoid going into like a hypomanic or a depressive wave?
Yeah, I think my main warning sign for both sides of it is sleep. So if I'm depressed, I find it really difficult to get up in the morning. My first thoughts in the morning are really difficult to sort of overcome, and that voice is quite a lot louder in terms of what's the point in exercising, not caring what I wear, not seeing the point in putting on makeup or doing my hair. It's like I can hear the change. And then if I'm going into a high, it's the complete opposite. I can't wait to get out of bed at 4 a.m. I'm on my run and music sounds amazing. My breakfast tastes different. My smells are incredible. So it's like within the first hour, you sort of know. And so now I just have to, every week it's sort of just keeping track of that and trying to keep a stability. So I just try not to let either side escalate. So it's completely different management on either side, but at least I know quite quickly which way I'm going.
What do you do besides upping your medication if it's a really bad phase of not sleeping? What else do you do to help your sleep?
Now, so I'm actually on a quarter of the medication I've ever been on. I think my last relationship broke down because I felt too sedated. And especially around this book, I've become so much more confident in being around people hypomanic or depressed and not caring as much. So I just don't care if people think I'm bipolar, because I am. So actually a lot of my management is away from medication now, and it is just things like getting the energy out in a healthy way if I'm high. So running, seeing friends who calm me down. Like certain friends have quite a sort of motherly energy, and I know if I see them, then we'll have a big meal and watch TV, and I'll bring that energy down. And then also, if I'm low, taking more medication can actually make you really, really sedated, and it's harder to run and exercise. So it tends to not be the best thing to take more. It's actually better to be really strict about exercise, even if it's like swimming or yoga or walking, just to sort of keep that sense of achievement happening and just completing small tasks. And just, I think the main thing is that voice in my head. I just really try not to be so hard on myself. That's the main thing, because both episodes go, you just don't know whether it's a week or like a day until it sort of eases up again.
How did you discover running, and how do you ensure that it stays in check? Because I can imagine suddenly you're in a hypomanic phase and you sort of start really running excessively, and then injury starts happening, and then you can't. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I started running at school. And then with modeling, it was always like all the time. And then actually, the last few years I've got into long distance running, and it's given me the most incredible relationship with my body, because you can't over exercise if you want to do the distances. So now I exercise 2 or 3 times a week, which is just the nicest feeling, because on the Sunday you can actually go for 3 hours, and I just have so much enjoyment in having days off exercise now and not overdoing it, because those longer runs, my overall mood is so stable if I can sort of get the energy out, or do it with a friend and see a new part of London, or it's just given me like a whole different meaning to exercise, because it's so therapeutic. As soon as you go over like 10k, from 10k up to 30k, it is honestly meditation. And I'd never got to access that type of running when I was modeling, because if you run those distances, you put on weight, and my agents always used to make a comment. So this is the first time in my life where I'm like not super overdoing it, which is really nice.
Yeah, it is so nice. And I think I heard you say that it is so important, like, that you don't do everything every day, because actually the joy is then sat from it. And it's actually so lovely to have. And I think that's a mistake people make with routine, as routine can become monotonous so quickly. Whereas actually, if it's something you do look forward to, and you wake up on a Sunday, it's like, oh, it's my day for my long run.
Yeah.
Versus like, oh, it's a slog. It's just, I feel depleted.
Yeah.
And actually knowing that your body is a machine and it can perform if you give it the right fuel and the right rest, and you're physically able enough to do it.
Yeah. And also I think just as a woman, a lot of my mood can cycle with my hormones. So I was certain that I had PMDD for a while, because I would always have depression in the same week, and there's one week where I'm very susceptible to it. And I've just got so much better at realizing all those symptoms get better if you listen to what you need. And that week I do no exercise, and it's really helped my mood, just to be like sleeping longer, eating more, chilling out, because then when I do have energy the following week, I feel so good for it, and I really enjoy sort of like that coming back into it. So yeah, getting better at listening to what my body needs, because I'm probably the most sort of unroutine person, in that every day is a different mood, or every week is a different mood, so I can't be consistent with exercise, really.
Yeah, well, yeah, in a way it's that, yeah, like you said, it's the variety that kind of almost brings the colour to life in some ways, and actually being able to tap into that is a really positive thing, to gauge how you're feeling, and not to have that sort of autopilot mode on. What's it been like with your family and navigating those relationships through your journey with bipolar?
They're still getting to trust me. There's been a few occasions, they're always the ones to worry first. So whenever I've had hypomanic weeks, I always get phone calls from my family saying, you need to sleep, this. But I think they're learning gradually that I also don't want to get ill again. So when I was having 3 hours night sleep and they were getting really concerned about it, I think I've had to keep reassuring them that I am doing what I can, and I would never put us all through that again. So the relationships are definitely getting more trustworthy, as they've seen now that it's been 6 years of no look to have another episode. But it's also made us all a lot more open with our language around mental illness. I think I just sort of burst that bubble because I've been so open about it, but definitely didn't grow up speaking about it at home. And now I think when you are so open, it allows other people in the family to talk openly about what they manage. And it's been really good for us to all sort of just break that seal of being closed about how we're feeling and our mental health. So really good. Yeah.
And what is the most supportive thing, like your parents, your sister, like a friend can do when you're in a hypomanic or a depressive episode? What do you find to be like the most, I don't know, nourishing thing for them to do for you?
I think for them all is to treat me the same, weirdly. I think I really struggle with if someone's like worried and pandering to me. I love if they're just sort of quite to the point saying, okay, we're going to do this, like quite assertive. Because I think especially if you're low, you don't really know what you want to do and you don't really know what's going to help. And if a friend is like, right, I'm going to make you dinner, or we're going to go for a walk, I love that assertion to come from someone else where they're recognizing it, but they don't want to sit and talk about it and be like, why are you sad? Because it's not sad, and it's definitely probably not caused by anything they've done or something in my life. It's just an episode. So I find that really helpful. And yeah, my family and my friends have been very good at that. I almost just don't want to sit and talk about it too much because I hate to feel unbalanced in a friendship. I like to also know that I can support them.
Exactly. And I think that's, once you've kind of opened up about your own struggles, some people are very good at making you feel like a complete patient and a victim. And immediately there's sort of such an imbalance in a relationship that it, like you said, it doesn't feel very comfortable.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what's going on in your head. And you're, so certainly from my experience anyway, I don't know, when I go and see a friend and I'm not feeling great, actually the last thing I feel like is talking about it, because like I've literally like gone through everything in my mind a million times. So like, please don't give me that sort of self-pity. It's like, oh, I'm really sorry. It's like, well, it is what it is. And like you said, I think decisiveness is almost the most helpful thing people can do. Like, right, this is the plan. Let's do this. If you're okay with it, like, because if as soon as you're given options, it feels overwhelming. And then you just tend to hibernate. Well, that's what I do.
Yeah, it's nice not to be given too many options, for sure.
What are any daily practices that help you stay grounded besides sort of running and the exercise? What else do you do, or is there nothing that you found like on a daily basis that does keep you sort of, I don't know, just with that inner sense of calm and peace?
I think surrounding myself with the right people, for sure. I'm so reactive to how people make me feel. So I've now got to this amazing stage where I'm either calling my friends on the phone in the morning or physically seeing them, and just staying with people who really, really support me and are there if I'm low or high, and I can turn up in either. I also eat really healthily, and that was like any woman in their 20s, that was such a complicated few years to understand what that is for me. But I feel so amazing for eating fresh food, and I've found a love of cooking, and that was something which came in the last few years for sure. And that just makes me feel really good and gives me the energy to do the runs. So I love that. And then another one would just be trying to reduce my screen time. And I think that has such a big impact on my mood. And when I'm feeling down, it's just the worst thing for me. So I just make an effort, even if it's in the evening, going out without my phone. I just leave it at home once I've met up with friends, or I turn it off over the weekend. I think I just have to be a bit more strict on that sort of thing than the average person, because I can feel it having such an effect on my mood. So that really helps, is to be strict with that and just delete apps unless I'm sharing something. I just won't have it on my phone.
Yeah, I think it's just an endless abyss, isn't it? And it's just it can very quickly become quite a negative vortex of just and also like, you know, one inevitably compares oneself to other people, and it's all those sorts of things. So what advice would you give someone who suspects that they might be bipolar, or just not really understanding why they have these depressive waves and then suddenly they go into a hypomanic wave? Where would you say that they should start by kind of seeking advice?
I think my advice would always be to speak to a doctor before going online, because things like TikTok now, people are sort of self-diagnosing, and bipolar is so intense, and it's such a good thing to speak to someone professional and say your symptoms as honestly as possible. But I would make a physical doctor's appointment as soon as possible rather than reading online, because everyone's experience with bipolar is so different, and people have different symptoms if they're comorbid with other things. So it can actually be a bit too much information and a bit confusing. Another thing I would say is to go on the Bipolar UK website, because everything's really clear and really digestible, and it would help you quite quickly figure out whether this is something you could be dealing with. They've got a mood scale, and even when I did my screening of my documentary a few years ago, I put a mood scale on everyone's seats, and by the end of it, 2 people came over and said, my friend definitely has this. I can't believe I've never been aware of this, and I've known about your experience for years. And I was like, yeah, it's so good to see it written down and actually map out what hypomania could look like and what bipolar depression looks like, because even the depression is very different nature to someone else's depression.
Rosie, thank you so much. It's been such a really fascinating and very moving episode. And yeah, thank you for sharing your story with us. And I really hope the book sells as many copies as possible.
Thank you. It's just so funny it being on Amazon, because I keep meeting people and they literally order it in that moment. I'm like, whoa, this is so easy. Yeah, thank you for having me.